When I was 15, I had my first girlfriend. We lived in an upper-class area with very quiet and peaceful streets. My girlfriend, Casey, also lived just 2 blocks away, so I could walk to her house almost nightly. One Thursday night, during break when I had nothing to do, I started my walk over to Casey's house. It was later in the evening, but I didn't really have a curfew, so it didn't matter. However, pretty soon I started to hear strange noises around me, and when I say around me, I mean mostly behind me. I was walking down the street when I heard a bush rustling. I glanced back for a second, but kept moving, walking a bit faster. Then, I heard it again, this time a twig snapping. I stopped, looked behind me. Nothing. Just an empty street. I picked up the pace, but when I was almost at Casey's house, I heard footsteps behind me. Quick, light steps. I turned, but still saw nothing. When I got to her house, I called her. She picked up right away, and I told her how freaked out I was. I walked around the bushes to her driveway, and there she was, staring out of her bedroom window. She waved, and I waved back. Then she asked, "Who's that guy behind you?" I turned around, and there he was, crouched down, walking just 10 feet behind me. My heart stopped. I screamed and ran for the door, pounding on it. The man grabbed me, tried to choke me out, but then he just let go and bolted. Casey's mom opened the door, and I rushed inside. As I caught my breath, Casey came running over, and the door slammed shut behind us. Oh, 3 Mini high, I was out of breath and my heart was racing. Casey's mom hugged me and asked a few questions before calling the police to warn them about a dangerous man in the area. She let me stay over that night for obvious reasons and drove me home the next day. One night, it was stormy and dangerous. Everyone in my family was doing their own thing. I was in my room watching TV, my parents were in the living room watching a comedy show, and my sister was playing video games upstairs. I usually enjoyed stormy nights like this because they made me feel relaxed. That was until there was a monstrous bang on my window. I jumped up and looked outside. There was someone outside my window, but the rain pouring down the glass blurred his face. He started pounding at my window, and it sounded like he was screaming for help. I opened the window just a crack, and he screamed, "I'm hurt!" The rain was so loud, I had to scream at him to come around to the front. I ran to the living room to tell my dad that there was a man outside, seemingly in distress. Then came the knocks and shouts for help at the front door. My dad was about to open the door, but I stopped him. I said, "Wait," because I wasn't sure if it was a good idea. Then the phone rang, and on the TV, the caller ID showed our next-door neighbor's name. My dad ran to pick up the phone, and when I heard him say, "No," expletive way, I knew something was wrong. He hung up the phone and told us to stay away from the door. He went to the window and peeked outside, saying he saw a man crouched down, pounding on the door, and holding some kind of large, sharp tool. My dad yelled through the front door, warning the man to leave before the cops arrived. He then called the police. Eventually, the man outside gave up and disappeared. Later, my dad spoke with the neighbor, who said he saw a homeless-looking guy rummaging through his shed before emerging with a large chopping axe. The cops later found the crazed man wandering around the streets, and it made it into the newspaper a few days later. When I was a really young kid, I was in the living room watching my favorite cartoon. The TV was loud, but I thought I could hear my mom calling my name from downstairs. I called back, but she didn't answer, so I assumed she couldn't hear me. But then, I heard her call me again, so I went downstairs to the basement. The lights were off, and halfway down the stairs, I called out for her. She didn't answer, and I realized she wasn't in the basement. I started going back up the stairs, but before I could reach the top, I heard her voice again, calling my name from down in the basement. I looked into the pitch-black darkness and ran up the stairs, practically crying for my mom. She rushed down the stairs, and I told her that something had been calling me from downstairs that sounded just like her. She swore she hadn't been calling me. To reassure me, she went down to the basement to check, but I still didn't feel better. She didn't believe me, I'm sure. After all, I was just a little kid. But to this day, I know what I heard. My grandpa recently told me a story about a night. He took his dog for walks on the property where he lives, about 2 hours from us on a farm. He lives with his wife, Mary Ann, whom he married about 15 years ago. Every day, Mary Ann would take their dog, Sherry, for a walk in the morning, and my grandpa would take her for a walk in the evening. One evening, during their regular walk at sunset, my grandpa was walking Sherry down the usual dirt path near the woods. He passed another person on the trail who had a large hood up. Sherry instinctively barked and pulled towards the stranger, like most dogs do when they see someone unfamiliar. My grandpa said hello to the stranger, but the person just walked past without saying a word. He and Sherry kept walking, but Sherry kept looking back and barking. After a few minutes, my grandpa turned around to see the stranger, who had been a distance ahead of him, stalking him from behind a tree. My grandpa, sensing something was wrong, picked up the pace. At his old age, he always carried pepper spray in his coat pocket for situations like this. When he was getting closer to the house, my grandpa heard clicks from the leaves on the ground, just inches behind him. Before he could turn around, a warm glove covered his mouth and nose, preventing him from breathing or screaming. He says he could hear Sherry barking and biting at the stranger, which might have helped loosen the man's grip. My grandpa struggled to grab the pepper spray from his pocket, and when he did, he sprayed it at least 10 times. Even after the man let go and started to scream. My grandpa ran back to the house as quickly as he could, and he was perfectly fine. I grew up in California for the first 14 years of my life, in a neighborhood that wasn't the best. It was an area known to be home to members of the Crips, one of the biggest street gangs in Los Angeles. My best friend, Stevie D, lived 2 doors down. We spent a lot of time together, riding bikes around town, playing video games, and just hanging out. When we were 12, one night we decided to bike over to an abandoned house in our neighborhood. It had been vacant for years because no one wanted to buy it. We pulled up on our bikes and Stevie pointed at the window saying, "Look." I moved closer and looked, and sure enough, there was someone peeking out the window. It was hard to tell if they were looking at us, but it definitely looked like a face sitting between the curtains. It was strange because the house had been abandoned for so long. We stared at the window longer than we should have, and then we noticed something even stranger. The person didn't move at all. It seemed like it could be a Halloween decoration, but we quickly realized that someone must have snuck into the house to put it there. Being the mischievous kids we were, Stevie D and I decided to sneak around the back of the house and check it out. We hid our bikes and crept into the yard. To our surprise, the back door was already unlocked. When we stepped inside, the house was dark but not pitch black. We made our way through the rooms until we reached the living room, where we wanted to check out the fake head in the window. The room smelled bad, but I picked up the head from the windowsill. The moment I touched it, I screamed and dropped it. It didn't feel like a Halloween prop. It felt like real skin. Blood started pouring out of the bottom of the head. I panicked, and Stevie D and I ran for the back door, got on our bikes, and raced away. It turns out the head belonged to a victim of the Crips, and it had been placed there as a message. Last year, a guy came to my house's door around 9 p.m. He knocked. So I got my mom, and she went to see who it was. We live in a rural area, so visits that late are extremely uncommon and strange. The guy talked to my mom about how he was opening a business and asked if she liked American-made products. Then, he handed her a Clorox container as a sample. He went back to his minivan, opened it, and pulled out what he called a vacuum cleaner. When my mom saw 5 other men sitting inside, she told me to run and get my phone. We didn't have a landline, so I couldn't find it, but I grabbed a knife and stood around the corner. My mom threw the container outside and told them to get off her property, saying she was calling the cops. They quickly peeled out of the driveway and we never saw the car again. I've always been into extreme sports. Since I was little, I've been mountain climbing, parasailing, scuba diving, and of course, skiing. I go upstate skiing at least 10 times a season, sometimes with friends and sometimes alone. One time, my friend Hugh and I decided to go camping and do some backcountry skiing, which means skiing in areas outside of ski resort boundaries. It was a 3-hour drive to get there, followed by off-roading to the location. I parked my truck at the bottom of a hill, and we unloaded all our gear, including camping equipment and skis. After we set up camp near the bottom of a hill, we hiked up the hill to scout the area. At one point, Hugh and I lost each other while skiing down a bigger hill. I assumed I'd meet him at the bottom, or find him eventually. When I checked my walkie-talkie, he hadn't answered, so I figured he was still downhill. While walking with my skis at the bottom of the hill, I met another skier, who was friendly and asked about the best hills and whether we were camping. He had his skis strapped to his orange backpack, and he mentioned that he and his wife were looking for a place to set up camp near other people. Though I didn't really want to hike all the way back to camp, I decided to be a good Samaritan and help him. We hiked together for a while, and after some small talk, we finally reached the campsite. I turned to ask him where his wife was, but when I looked at him closely, something about his gear struck me as being similar to Hugh's. For a split second, I thought it might be him playing a prank, but the voice was different. As the man got closer, I began to feel uneasy. He was walking faster and approaching me with a more intimidating pace. Panicking, I ran to my tent, digging for my flare gun. The man grabbed my leg, and I felt an intense tingle followed by a burning sensation, like an electric shock. I screamed in pain, but managed to pull out the flare gun and shot it at the man. He immediately backed up with his hands in the air, and that's when I noticed a knife embedded deep into my leg. I demanded to know where my friend was, and the man answered quickly, saying he was near the bottom of the hill where I had lost him. While I was on the phone with 911, the man took off. I waited for what felt like forever in the cold, until I heard the reassuring sound of a rescue helicopter overhead. I shot my flare gun again, and soon enough, the helicopter located me and my injured leg. They also found Hugh, unconscious at the bottom of the hill, who had been robbed and stabbed twice in the leg. Both of us were taken to the hospital, but we were fine in the end. I lived in a small college town, and one night while I was studying, I decided to go outside on our front porch for a cigarette. A girl from the apartment next door came home from downtown by herself. You could tell she had been drinking. She barely got the door shut before a guy, who appeared out of nowhere, knocked on her door. It was about 2:30 a.m., so I thought it was strange for anyone to be knocking at that hour. I decided to stay outside and watch. The guy introduced himself, which struck me as odd, and they ended up talking for over 10 minutes. He did some creepy things, like stroking her hair at least 3 times and inching closer to her in the doorway. I made a point of being loud with my textbook to let him know I was there, and after a while, he disappeared as suddenly as he'd come. Days later, the police asked me to sit with a sketch artist, and when the sketch was made public, it led to a flood of calls. The guy turned out to be a serial rapist who followed lone girls home from bars and pretended to be a cab offering them a ride. The girl was lucky though, because she lived so close to the bars that he didn't have time to pull his usual cab routine. I've only used Craigslist once in my life, and that one time left me with a very sour taste. A guy had posted an ad for a ping pong table that I wanted to buy for my roommate and me. We set a time for me to pick it up that night, so I removed the back seats of my truck to fit it in. When I arrived and texted the guy, he opened the door, and I walked up to greet him. He invited me into the basement, and there was the ping pong table, right in the middle of the room. He said he needed to find the paddles, and asked me to wait in the basement. The whole house had a distinct smell, cottony and smoky. I waited in the basement for a while and began snooping around. That's when I found a drawer full of old Polaroid pictures of a girl tied to a chair with tape over her mouth. There were also folders labeled A to Z, but I didn't want to open them. I started to take pictures with my phone, but realized I had no service down there. It was time to go. I ran to the door, but it was locked. As soon as I tried the knob, I heard the man's voice on the other side, apologizing that the door was accidentally locked and he'd go look for the key. I didn't say anything in response, just started to figure out how to escape. I grabbed a few screwdrivers, used one to unlock the door, and bolted outside. I drove to the nearest police station, showed them the pictures, and gave them the address. A few days later, I learned the man was part of a child pornography ring on the deep web. I still can't imagine what he had planned for me, but I'm just glad I got away. When I was 14, I babysat a 6-year-old boy named Cody. His parents had given me only a few instructions, one of which was not to let Cody go into their room. They also mentioned that Cody acted a bit different than other kids and that he would talk to himself or his imaginary friend when playing with toys. One afternoon, Cody was playing with his toys on the floor, and I was watching TV. He kept using the name Agnes, as though he was playing with someone sitting across from him. Then, one of the toys, this little cube thing with a crank, activated by itself. It was weird because it was the kind of toy that took effort to activate, and it had started on its own. I asked Cody how that was possible, and he replied, "Agnes is playing with it." That night, while I was washing up in the bathroom, I heard a knock at the door. I opened it, but no one was there. Then, down the hallway, one of the doors creaked open on its own. I walked toward it, thinking it was Cody messing around. But when I entered the room, there he was, sitting in the corner of the bed, staring at me. I asked, "Who opened the door?" He just said, "Agnes." I quickly grabbed Cody and brought him back to the living room, staying there until his parents got home. I didn't mention anything about what happened, but when they asked me to babysit again weeks later, I never returned their call.